Guilarte. We'll come back with more after this.
Welcome back to First Up, the First Stop in your busy day. We continue to put the spotlight on what's currently taking place in terms of our national security this morning. Reports of an alleged plot to assassinate the Prime Minister and several senior cabinet officials. There is a special cabinet meeting, an extra special cabinet meeting happening this morning. Shortly after that, there'll be a special press conference with details on what has been decided to deal with this particular issue. We here at CTV, as well as on Talk City 91.1 FM, will be carrying that for you live once we get the go-ahead to do so. Right now, though, we want to look at some of the elements involved in a scenario like this. How does a country manage a situation like this? And to shed some light on how it's been done in other jurisdictions, we've got a former Staff Sergeant at the U.S. Marine Corps, Rodney Guilarte, with us this morning. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
Rodney. Okay, so our country is on high alert. This is, some would say, very shocking news. Some would also say not so shocking news. When you're doing a job like that, you need to expect things like this coming at you left, right, and center. What's your take on what you've seen and heard thus far?
Well, when you look at what's going on here right now and the assassination plot that they're saying has occurred, you can understand the reaction and level of emotion in this country, specifically because if you look at the size of the U.S., you compare the size of the populations to the size of this population. I mean, the President of the United States is under threat every day. I mean, there's hundreds of ongoing investigations conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigations in conjunction with Secret Service against the President of the United States. So it's a daily thing for them. Now, you take into account the size of our country. I mean, it creates definitely a higher level of emotion and drama for such a small country to experience something like this. But again, in more cases than not, it's how you react to things, and there's definitely a different response in, say, the UK or United States to threats on the head of state.
You mentioned the fact that because we're such a small state, something like this would produce a great deal of emotion and have drama surrounding it. That could lead to citizens becoming hyper-vigilant.
Right.
Is that hypervigilance on the part of the ordinary law-abiding citizen a good thing for the authorities or a bad thing? Because people are probably going to want to say, but I noticed something really strange going on in my neighborhood. Could that be connected to it? I want to let the authorities know. Is that good for the authorities or is that bad for the authorities?
It can be good and bad because you're creating a sense of vigilance versus a sense of paranoia. You don't want a citizenry that's paranoid, that's consistently paranoid and walking around like they're under some kind of duress. You want citizens to be vigilant in the active in the participation of maintaining national security at the from the individual come all the way up to the national governmental level.
There's a difference between a national security threat and a security threat from high-ranking officials, including the leaders of a country.
In most countries in the world, they do not equate a threat on an individual with a threat on the nation.
Even if that person is a leader of the nation?
Even if the person, a threat on Obama is not a threat on the United States. Because you have to remember, in most constitutions and in most forms of government, you have elected officials. Elected officials come and go, but governments and the form of government and the mechanism of government continues. That's what you call a threat on national security. Because remember, threats on national security include military, economic, political, social, and environmental threats. Because all these things can destabilize, governments, can destabilize the government's ability to respond to things. I would say that natural, what I call a mini natural disaster in Marival, more of a threat to national security than on any individual. And it's not like, this is my opinion, it's like basic math. 1 + 1 = 2.
More people can be hit.
More people can be affected because it's how it affects the nation as a whole and the citizenry. That's what we define as national security,
But there are those who would argue that given the way we are politically comprised and the size of our nation, that a threat like this against such a high-profile personage, the leader of the country, can lead to a certain extent a threat to overall national security, can lead to a certain degree of destabilization of our democracy.
Well, again, you look at the constitution of most countries. If a prime minister or a head of state is killed or assassinated, there's a mechanism in place for a stopgap measure or whatever you want to call it for continuance of government. There's a deputy prime minister. In the States, in the United States, you have the president, you have the vice president, and you have the Speaker of the House. If the president, look at the JFK assassination. Who took over right after that?
Succession.
Lyndon Johnson was the succession. There's a system of succession. So again, we have to look at things in reality. Again, what you hear me talking about on TV is basic mathematics in a manner of speaking. The context: 1 + 1 = 2.
Does it make a difference, Rodney, that and people will be looking on, this is a particularly peculiar situation because we are under a state of emergency called to deal with some imminent threat to national security.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And while we're under this state of emergency to deal with a national security threat, this occurs, in many people's estimation, as a backlash to the leader of the country taking this decision.
Right.
So does that now constitute, doesn't it exacerbate the situation?
And for me to comment on that, whether the context of where the assassination plot, where the threat, the source of the threat, what is the genesis of the threat, I can't really allude to that or speculate because, again, in my position, I cannot depend on speculation. I have to deal with, well, what are the facts and what are the mechanisms?
But the facts are that the leader of the country, the
put it this way,
elected leader
if the
of the
investigation proves that this is a result of the SOE, then the investigation will state that.
But doesn't the fact that it occurs even during a heightened security state as an SOE make one even more concerned that negative forces will actually have the gumption to threaten the Prime Minister and high-ranking cabinet officials while we're in this heightened state of security?
Now, here's the problem with our culture here in Trinidad. We tend to, how should I say this and be very nice at the same time? We tend to have an immediate emotional knee-jerk to situations and scenarios. This is everything here is true. It's a viable threat. But again, we're inciting the population. You don't want to incite the population. You want to present a calm, centered, focused, okay, this is happening, but business continues. Again, what's key for the government here to do is maintain their bearing, maintain the stability, maintain a level head about the whole thing, and not to incite the population.
We're in control.
We're in control. Because a government that's in control is a government that creates trust, that engenders trust and engenders stability in the country. Because again, let's say the SOE has been totally justified. Again, our conduct and our ability to be stable in our thinking, stable in our conduct and our communications as a government is what lends legitimacy to the SOE. If we're constantly knee-jerking in an emotional sense to all these different things, then we create unstable perceptions, because remember, perception is in politics. Again, so how the government handles this, whether from a knee-jerk situation or from a calm, centered, focused, okay, people, there's been this thing, this threat, this is how we're going to deal with it, business as usual, let's move on.
In one of the newspaper reports this morning, there is a quote from a senior government minister who said, quote, "The police are on high alert about certain matters involving state security. They unearthed an assassination plot against the Prime Minister and the Attorney General, who are specific targets by an extremist fringe group comprising various discrete elements from criminal underworld gangs and persons suspected to be involved in the international drug and arms trade. And apparently the plot, this is from a senior police official, was hatched by several persons held under the anti-gang legislation while they were in custody at Golden Grove Prison. That's within the early days of the state of emergency. So that's why it's being seen as a perceived backlash from the application of the state of emergency.
Well, taking that information at face value, you want to be able to address the situation without disrupting the national psyche. You want to be able to definitively and assertive, assert yourself with a certain amount of militancy towards a situation, so you send a message through the criminal element, through the insurgent element, through whatever elements there are in this country, that, hey, we will not take this lying down. Fine. If, this information is real, if you take it at face value, everything is good, deal with it. Be definitive about it. But the one thing that I wouldn't recommend or suggest doing is disrupting the country and inciting an emotional response in the country.
Does this legitimize,
business has to continue.
Does this legitimize the SOE, given the fact that if there are gangs or entities this organized that would pose such a threat at this time, even under the SOE, it means that there was this threat that needed to be dealt with at a serious level in this country that may have not been dealt with as effectively.
It could or couldn't be used to legitimize. Because remember, if there wasn't, people can say, again, basic mathematics, that if there wasn't an SOE, there wouldn't be a threat, right? So again, which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
How can you say that? Because if the element exists, and you're saying that, well, we should not have had an SOE, so we would not have riled up the negative element. It's obvious that, to me, that given what we're seeing happening around the world, given the fact that the statistics coming out from all the research in the Western Hemisphere show that this side of the globe is the most violent, and certainly we're not absolved from that in Trinidad and Tobago along the transshipment points.
But again, most countries things like this don't make headline news in most countries, honestly. I'm not saying that Trinidad is wrong for this kind of response. All I'm saying is most large countries, developed countries in the world, this doesn't make headline news.
But Obama was not even in the White House last week, and it made headline news that somebody shot a bullet at the White House.
Okay, 1 day, 2 days goes by, and then it's, okay, we're back
but
to
this is
business.
one day.
Okay, Rodney, that said, though, here's my next question. Should our local media have run with this story so soon? Should we have let some time pass, given the authorities, an opportunity to do whatever raids and so on that they need to bring in everybody who may have been involved in this plot before we broke the story?
We have, I'll say it like this. There is a danger of jeopardizing the investigation. We have seen in recent times, especially in the last 2 to 3 weeks, and I won't mention the situation of the names, that media involvement has been jeopardizing ongoing investigations. Mm-hmm. There has to be a level of discretion. You look at history, like say with the Cuban Missile Crisis and all these things, the media were cognizant enough to know we're partnering with the government to make sure that stability and cooler heads prevail. At the same time, media here tend to incite the situation beyond reasonable levels. Again, I am not going to say here, I am not going to even speculate that this is conjecture, that this is just all a farce. It's not. This is an ongoing investigation. This is a viable, real investigation of what's going on with a threat against the Prime Minister and her government. But at the same time, we don't need to get into the inquire paparazzi kind of...
But is that a fair assessment? And we have to take a break. But in today's media landscape, media is not just newspaper and electronic television and radio anymore. Media is social networking. And when people see increased army police patrols in Silas and Arima, there will be traffic.
Right.
People will start to talk. So the absence of information can add to that anxiety, and you can answer that question when we come back from the break. We've got to take a break. We will come back with more after this.